Hey class, how's it going? Hope all is well out there. Gonna do some chapter 7. This is hypothesis testing. So we'll be doing a lot of this concept in the next few chapters, actually. Um, so in general, a hypothesis test is a process used to test a claim about a population. So let's look at an example to describe that. Suppose I tell you that I'm holding just a standard deck of 52 cards, right? So it's a regular deck. That means 50% of the cards are black and 50% are red. And then suppose we take a sample from that deck of 10 cards and we keep putting them back, so with replacement. And it turns out that 9 are red and only 1 is black. What do you think about my original claim? Do you think that I was telling the truth, that there is a mixture of red and black cards? Or is something fishy going on here? Or even more extreme, what if we took a sample of 20 cards and only one of them was black and 19 were red? So that's what we're looking at when we're doing a hypothesis test. We start with a claim, we take a sample, and then based off of the probability of that sample occurring, we either support that claim or go against it. Some nuts and bolts of this section: anytime you do a test, there's going to be 2 hypotheses. The names of them are the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis, and they have symbols. The symbol for the null is H sub 0, or sometimes I just say HO, and H sub A. Okay. Here's something that you'll definitely want to look back on, because there are specific inequalities for each type of hypothesis. Null hypothesis, notice, always has equality in it, as the greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, or just equals. Or H sub A is just the opposite of H sub 0. Right? So if, in this case, if H sub A is greater than or equal to, H sub O is greater than or equal to, then H sub A is less than. Okay? When you're performing a hypothesis test, you're always going to assume that the null hypothesis is true, and then you're always going to do one of these 2 things based off of the sample. Reject that null hypothesis, or you just can't reject it. We'll say fail to reject it. I would highly recommend reading this little paragraph here, because we're really talking about what's called this level of significance. And that's just the maximum allowable probability for unusual events. Okay? That will be given to you in these problems. Another key player in this section is going to be the p-value. A p-value is the probability of obtaining that sample statistic or more extreme from the sample data. So to describe that p-value, here's a little example we can look at. And it's this example. So in my little card example, the null hypothesis is that the deck is 50% black cards. The sample is drawn and we get a sample proportion calculated. Let's say it's like only 10% black cards. Then we'll be able to calculate this p-value, and that'll be the math of this section. Suppose the p-value is calculated to be 0.03 or 3%. What that means is we have a 3% chance of seeing this sample occur if that null hypothesis, that original claim, is true. So because that's so low, that sample is really unusual, which most likely means that original claim was false. There probably wasn't 50% black cards in the deck. So that's the logic of this. Some things to know. We'll have to know the type of test, and there's going to be 3 types of tests. Just look at the inequality for the H sub A, okay? So if it's a less than on the HA, it's a left-tailed test. So it would be something like this. If it's a greater than, it's a right-tailed test. And if it's a not equal to, then it's going to be a two-tailed test. Okay? And this will be then how we're going to make our final conclusion here. So we'll look back on that as we do these problems. It'll help you to make your conclusion. So let's look at some examples that you'll see in this section. We're just going to practice writing the null and alternative hypothesis using mathematical symbols, and then decide what type of test. So number 1, Kendrick claims that he can predict the outcome of an event more than 50% of the time. So this, because it's a proportion, we're going to use the symbol P. He is saying that P is greater than 0.5. Okay, and that is because it's a greater than and does not have equal. That will be an HA statement. So anytime there's not equals in there, it's an alternative hypothesis. The H sub 0 is the opposite of H sub A. So I'm still going to use P and I'm still going to use 0.5. I'm just going to flip the inequality around and put equals on. Okay. When I decide what type of test this is, I always look at the HA symbol. So because that's a greater than, then that was a weird but I didn't want to underline it. Maybe I should just erase that. And let's do something fancy. Highlight it. Okay, there, that's better. When I try to decide what type of test, I look at the HA, and since it's a greater than, that's going to be a right-tailed test. That'll be important when we start running all these hypothesis tests. Okay. One other thing it did say is specify which one is the claim. Well, it's Kendrick's claim. That's always just going to come from the wording of the problem. So H sub A or H sub O could be the claim. It just depends on the wording of the problem. So here, the claim is HA. Okay. That one was a little sloppy. Typically what you do, so let's look at number 2, you'll probably write it, or you'll see it more like this, HO, HA, and then write one on top of the other. A lot of these for you will be multiple choice when you do the homework. Okay, so this one, a car dealership announces that the mean for an oil change is less than 15. So strictly less than 15 is an H sub A statement. And because it says mean this time, I'm going to use the correct symbol mu. Population mean is less than 15. That is the claim. Okay. And then I'll fill in the H sub 0. It's just greater than or equal to. Opposite. Again, H sub 0 has the equal. H sub A does not. Because H sub A now is a less than symbol, that would be a left-tailed test. So this would be left-tailed, okay? One more try. A polling company claims that the proportion of citizens who plan to vote is 40%, equals 40%. So I got a H sub 0, H sub A. Here is would be an equal is an H sub 0. Proportion is P. So my H sub 0 is P equals 0.4. That is the claim. And then H sub A, P does not equal 0.4. Opposite. Not equal on the HA, so I'm looking here to decide the type of test. Not equal, two-tail. So this would be a two-tailed test. Okay. Good so far. Let's put it together and also make some conclusions. And that'll be the end of this section, okay? So I'm still gonna create all of my HOs, HAs, and all of that, right? So the claim is that the mean is less than 26,860. So I'm just setting it up, HO, HA. Mean less than 26,860 will be an H sub 0. H sub O has to be the opposite. Okay. The claim is the HA in this case. This will be a two-tailed test. I mean, left-tailed test because it's less than. Now, we're going to continue. What if we have this scenario? Alpha is 0.05 and P is 0.025. What are we going to do? So when you run these tests to decide your final conclusion, compare those two. Here, if I look at that, I have alpha is 5% and P is 2.5%. Sometimes it's better to convert those to percents, comparing 5% to 2.5%. The 5% is bigger, so here alpha is bigger. If I look back at my instructions, when alpha is larger, with a bigger alpha and a smaller p, you're going to reject the null hypothesis, which is what you always do. Okay. So in this one then, we're going to reject, whoa, sorry about that. We're going to reject H sub 0. Let's make our conclusion. Now, when you make your conclusion, the two things you're looking at, which one is the claim, and whether or not you rejected H sub 0 or failed to reject H sub 0. And then go back to that conclusion table. Okay? So for this number 5, I'm looking here now. Right? Which one is it? Well, H sub A was the claim, and we rejected H sub 0, which means here is my final answer. There is sufficient evidence to support the claim. So I would go back to my problem and say sufficient evidence to support the claim. This is really bad handwriting. But look back up top for the overall well written out typed version. Okay, there's a couple more. Well, you could try those on your own, and then I'm just going to write the final answer here, and then you can test to see if you're right. Okay, and then this is what we end up with. So as you can see on that first one, because P is larger, you're going to fail to reject, and then go to your conclusion using the fact that H sub 0 is the claim and failed to reject. And there is insufficient evidence to reject that claim. And then finally, that last one, P is smaller, so you're going to reject H sub 0, and H sub A is the claim, so there's sufficient evidence to support the claim. Okay, so that'll get you started. You can look at some more examples. I'll probably do some in the homework itself here on the next video, and we'll go from there. Okay, it takes a little while to get used to, but once you get it, these aren't too bad. Okay, so I'll stop there. Hope all is well. Talk to you later.